what's good about it. I mean, to be honest with you, a lot of times people are really trying to say, this is my experience, this is how it affected me, this is how it was. Not that, I'm getting a 3.5 on my tricorder.
Right. Well, we all build on each other. I mean, these greats that have gone all over the world, deeply studying the Egyptian power places and, places all over the world, they'll read my story and they'll say, yes, here is a little place in the middle of nowhere that she experienced the same things. And at the time, from my own traditional knowledge and my own hocap going through, interacting with spirits in this place, these people will recognize that as the same as all the places they've been to and the ancient people who spoke about it. So, for me to read their books after I had this experience was so comforting and amazing to me.
Oh, yeah.
So they'll see it in reverse, and they'll say, well, here's another one, and they all build on each other's knowledge and experiences and observations, and that's how we move forward. That is how we evolve as humanity.
Yeah, and I think it is interesting to kind of make these places known for a lot of reasons. I think a lot of people use those. I mean, I've known Bigfooters that are waiting for your book to come out because they think, oh, it's going to have some map in it where I'm going to have spots of the fawn.
No. Well, no. Okay, they can find a spot of the fawn. When you're in one.
Yeah.
Stuff happens, and you have experiences, but also you can feel it physically because in the physical world, they are different from the rest of the landscape. You can feel a magnetic anomaly. You can feel the telluric energy, especially if you're in one at 3 a.m, because that's when everything that conducts and fires up and gets very electrical.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's a very subtle charge, but you feel it. You'll feel it in your body if you're, quiet and in a quiet state. I look at, there's a lot of ruckus about Michael Merchant. I love him. And he's a friend. And he found a place that's a sacred site. It is a spot of the fawn. It's been venerated by ancient people. And he found this place. He was drawn to it synchronistically. And it took him from flesh and blood Bigfoot to, anomalous lights and UFOs and things in the sky. And he was, I have to hand it to him because he realized that these things have something to do with consciousness and a visionary state.
Mm-hmm. Well, and
people make fun of him and tear him up, and he's excited to share these things. But actually, in my opinion, he's one of the few that actually gets it, that it's about consciousness and that it's about, participating in that.
Right. And, I've always liked Michael. He's an interesting guy. If you I think on his YouTube channel does he still have his YouTube channel, Snowwalker Prime or something like that? I don't know, and I can't comment about flat Earth and stuff like that. God forbid if the Earth was flat. But no, I clearly don't.
That's all I'll say about him because he's not here to jump in. But there are some people that are aware that it's about consciousness, and I'll bet you that they get better and better at explaining it, and other people are going to start to talk about it, like Toby was doing, and it's going to come out where it's more acceptable and it's not laughed at so much, unless you turn it into a circus like some people do.
Yeah. Well, but I think Michael is a little bit of a contrarian too. Sometimes I think sometimes he comes up with some of these ideas. I don't know if he necessarily, I don't know. I don't know. I look at so, I can.
Well, at least he studies. Whatever he chooses to study, eventually he's going to end up in the same place. I mean, what is the definition of ignorance? To not know when knowledge is present and willfully disregard it.
Yeah.
So I would rather have someone studying and having wild ideas and spitballing than see people who just are like frozen ice cubes and refuse to even look any further than their own eyelashes.
No, absolutely.
So,
absolutely.
Have fun, study. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to say stupid stuff, but this is not something that science can really help you out with right now.
But
not right now.
And I think
later, maybe.
I think it is interesting because I had Michael Hall, and you don't know Michael, but he lives close up to me, and Sam and I went to the meeting with the UFOI team, and they were talking about Grant Cameron, and he's a big UFO guy out of Canada. And, to be honest with you, I don't really know that much about him. So, but, it was interesting that he, made the statement that it was all about consciousness. It's all about consciousness. I think we're all coming to the same conclusion that it's all about consciousness now.
And Jacques Vallée wrote about it extensively. Also, people like to, more science-minded folks like to poke fun at the NIDS, but, the NIDS experiment on Skinwalker, that was a group of science-minded folks that came together. Now, there's a lot of conspiracy theories, and let's just forget about those things for now. Let's just say what they ended up saying is it's consciousness. It has to do with consciousness. It is visionary. It's not something that's nuts and bolts, but it does leave physical fingerprints, and it does seem to manipulate physical reality. There is no science that can explain that, really. Maybe people always bring up quantum physics. I don't know enough about quantum physics. Like I said, 7th grade math level. I'm like the last person to try and explain it. But they said that they knew things were happening. They witnessed them. They were backing each other up, running cameras. But this was 1994, so their advanced instruments and things used today, like in our back hip pockets.
Right.
It's not advanced to us anymore. But at that time, they had the best information they could and the best instrumentation they could. But they still, even back then, said it's something to do with consciousness. Consciousness is involved in this. So I'm not saying, again, that it's not autonomous, conscious beings, separate, free will entities that are spiritual interacting with us. I'm not saying that at all. I'm not saying that forest people aren't real thinking autonomous beings, but spirits need us as much as we need them. So consciousness is involved. So science could look at it and say, well, it's just your subconscious projecting. But there's just too many plot holes in the story. And I believe spirits exist. I'm not a scientist, so it's okay for me.
I think it's okay to be a scientist and say you don't know. It's a funny thing.
And they do, and the good ones say that. They do.
Exactly.
And I love science. God, I couldn't imagine a world without science. I love watching what NASA's doing, and I love watching all the things in space. And I love hearing about things. It's fascinating to me. So, again, we want to be balanced, open mind, but also a skeptical mind.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I've spoken to several scientists who are, atheists and things like that, and you say, well, is the Big Bang Theory incompatible with an ultimate creator of the universe? And I say, obviously
not really.
No, it's not. And if they're honest,
really. It's just another way of perceiving it or explaining it. Everything seems to be fairly. As long as you don't get into kindergarten version of religion, which a lot of it has been reduced to, so people could understand it, but didn't have great, tremendous education, and then it just stayed that way. But if you look at the alchemical stuff and the all that kind of thing from all the global cultures, the ancient wisdom, mystery stuff,
right?
It's pretty close to science, actually. It's just looking at it from an opposite point of view. Science says the universe is matter, and the ancients are saying the universe is mental.
Yeah.
So it's mind over matter versus matter over mind.
Right. But I think that the interesting thing about it is that we know nanoseconds after the universe was created from a scientific standpoint, but we still don't know what created it, if you're being honest. And then I think we're
right. And ancient people said it was a thought.
Yeah, and so that's totally doable. But but also that you have to realize is that, you know, from the standpoint of matter versus dark matter now versus, you know, dark energy, you know, we're actually figuring out that we don't really know what the universe is made of, you know, up until this point. I think that, you know, from that standpoint, there was just a new thing that was launched. I think it was called Dragonfly or something like that, and they basically found a dark matter universe and things like that. So, I mean, these things change.
There's all kinds of crazy stuff out there.
Right.
I mean, just crazy. I mean, it's crazy scientific discoveries, and you know. And I think it's mind-boggling.
Yeah, and I think that in a lot of ways it'll actually bring us a lot closer together once we start to realize a couple of different things as far as the way that we look at the universe. But it is one of those things that I think is so interesting that that we you know we have a tendency with science. You know, it's funny because I teach science and in schools, and so it's interesting that, you know, my explanation of science comes up from whenever I was taught science, and you know that was well, that's nearly 30 years ago. And it's interesting that science changes so fast that we don't keep up with it, and you know, from that standpoint, I mean, there's still people who still think that, you know, the evolutionary chain of you know, we're looking for the missing link versus evolutionary bushes of people that live, you know, around the planet at the same time, like the little Hobbit people and Neanderthal people and yeah.
I think that all those things are, you know, perfectly fine, and I think science is going to get a hold of them. And unfortunately, again, the internet has a cheese factor to it, and then, you know, it doesn't even seem like it's real, but then science will say, yeah, the Hobbit people were there on that island, and there was a tremendous story of evolution involved there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I look at the long skull people, I totally think that was something similar, that they were there, they existed, they were, you know, something on the planet, and we're just now looking at that. Science will look at that closer, they'll get to it. But, you know, I can also look at it myself and go, yeah, that looks pretty suspicious that's all real. You know, it's pretty clear that they're actual skulls and they're not head bound. They weren't put in a binding apparatus to become that way.
Right.
So I can look at things before science gets around to writing a couple thousand journals on it. I mean, we can all look at those photos and say, well, that looks pretty okay.
Well,
right?
But I think that's one of those things that are interesting is that, you know, I think, you know, there's several different episodes that sort of make natural history very, or natural science very, very hesitant to say that anything, you know, without a lot of testing first. You know, like Piltdown Man, you know, was the missing link, and then it turned out that it was, you know, just a composite jaw and skull of, you know, two different things. And just like Java Man was the same way. It was just sort of, you know.
Well, they admit that they make mistakes, but they just, you know, they're only as good as the knowledge they have at the time. Well, I don't know. That might be a bunch of hoo-ha. You know, we only.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just can't. I don't even want to think, but to be honest.
Well, no, but I'm saying.
That's the human element. I mean, humans will hide things, and you know, the ego protects all, and I mean, that's just a human thing. So,
but it is.
There are some things we'll never know.
No.
In our lifetime, but we can look at things and go, well, yeah, that looks pretty okay. That looks like it's probably true. I mean, I just had a discussion with a young man today about that, and you know, I wished that there was, you know, scientific evidence for different ancient cultures, and you know, they talk about the mound builder and the giants in the mounds, and we know the mound builder culture existed. We know it's phenomenal, but You know, it's really hard to pin down a skeleton and say, look, here's a 12-foot skeleton. You know, it's just newspaper articles. And, you know, when you talk to millions of people, you can't just say, yes, the